I never imagined that the moment my life began to unravel would look so ordinary. The late afternoon sun spilled across the cobblestones of a small Italian town, turning everything golden: the tiled roofs, the ivy-clad walls, even the glass of wine I was holding. Tourists wandered by, couples laughed over pasta, and somewhere nearby a violinist played a melody so soft it almost drowned out my husband's voice. Almost. Gabriel was drunk. His laughter was too loud, his gestures too wide. His friends, the same old college buddies who had treated me like an intruder since the moment we arrived, were goading him on, laughing at every cruel thing he said. I had tried to keep my tone calm when I asked him to stop drinking, to come back to the hotel, to remember that we were in public. But the more I pleaded, the more he performed. "You always have to ruin the fun, don't you, Lex?" he slurred, smirking, as if this humiliation was foreplay. "You always have to be the adult in the room." I turned away, embarrassed, furious, and more tired than I'd ever admit. The truth was, we'd been drifting for years. Somewhere between his promotions, his business trips, and my carefully edited role as the supportive wife who stayed behind to make everything perfect, something inside me had gone quiet. But that afternoon, standing on the street outside a small cafe, I realized silence could also be dangerous. "I'm going back to the hotel," I said, my voice trembling. "You can stay here with your friends. I'm done with this." He followed me outside, the laughter of his friends trailing behind him like a taunt. "Oh, don't be dramatic, Alexis. You're always so sensitive." Sensitive, I turned to face him. "You're drunk in the middle of the day and embarrassing both of us. I just want to leave." The smile he gave me then, that half smirk I used to find charming, looked twisted under the fading sunlight. "You want to leave," he said slowly. "Fine, leave." He walked to the car, opened the door, and looked at me over the roof. "Your purse has your passport, right?" I frowned. "Yes, why?" "Then you'll figure it out." He slammed the door and drove off. For a few seconds I stood frozen, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to circle back, to roll down the window and laugh, to say it was a stupid joke. But the taillights disappeared around the bend, and all that remained was the dust and the fading echo of his friend's laughter. At first I told myself it was a prank, something he'd apologize for later, but as minutes became hours and the town square emptied into silence, the pit in my stomach deepened into something else: realization. He wasn't coming back. I didn't even know the name of the town properly. Some picturesque stop between Florence and the coast, chosen because one of his friends had found a great deal on a villa nearby. The streetlights flickered on, and I stood there under their dim glow, clutching my purse, trying not to cry in front of strangers eating their dinner. When I finally did move, it was mechanical. I counted my money: €80, $37, no credit cards. Gabriel had been holding my wallet, he always did that now. "So you don't have to carry too much," he'd said once. I'd smiled and let him, thinking it was care. It was control. I found a small pension above a bakery that would rent me a room for €20 a night. The owner, an elderly woman with soft eyes and flour-dusted hands, didn't speak English, but she understood fear. She patted my arm and led me upstairs, humming something that sounded like a lullaby. That night I stared at my phone, dialing Gabriel over and over. 27 calls. Straight to voicemail. I texted. I begged. I cursed. Nothing. Then I tried his friends, one by one, every number blocked. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't even a moment of rage. It was planned. The thought sliced through me like glass. He wanted me to panic. He wanted to teach me a lesson about control, about obedience, about what happens when I forget my place. Sleep didn't come. When it did, it was jagged and restless, filled with images of headlights disappearing into the night. By morning, I'd convinced myself he'd show up contrite, hungover, full of excuses. "I didn't mean it," he'd say. "You overreacted." We'd fly home, pretend nothing happened, and I'd go back to the quiet submission that kept our marriage running. But morning came, and he didn't. The next day I walked the towns searching for him. The hotel, the cafes, the tourist spots, asking with broken Italian if anyone had seen a tall man with American eyes and a cruel smile. No one had. By sunset, the truth had hardened inside me like stone. He'd left me here on purpose. The next morning I found a pawn shop near the train station. I stood in front of the glass window, staring at my wedding ring, the one he'd replaced on our 5th anniversary with a 2-carat diamond, as if love could be measured in carats. My hand shook as I twisted it off. The shopkeeper gave me a few €100, not even a fraction of what it was worth. But as the ring left my hand, I felt something unclench inside me, a quiet click, like a door opening somewhere deep within. He had taken everything from me, money, dignity, even my voice. But this was mine, my choice, my beginning. At the bus station, I stared at the schedule board lines of destinations blurring together. Rome, Florence, Venice, Athens. "Where you go?" asked the ticket woman, her accent thick but her eyes kind. I hesitated, then heard myself say, "Greece. The farthest place you can send me." She nodded, printed the ticket, and handed it over like a passport to another life. The journey took 14 hours, buses, ferries, another bus. By the time I arrived in a tiny coastal village, whose name I couldn't pronounce, my body ached. My eyes were raw from crying, and my soul felt stripped bare. The air smelled of salt and sun. Whitewashed houses leaned into each other like secrets. I had nothing left but a few bills, an old phone, and the ring-shaped mark still faint on my finger. As I walked through the narrow streets, exhaustion hit me so hard I could barely see straight. My water bottle was empty, my sandals worn through my feet, blistered. The road curved into olive groves, silver-green leaves whispering in the breeze. My knees buckled. I fell hard, the taste of dust filling my mouth. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was how it ended, abandoned in one country, dying in another. But life, I would later learn, has a way of bending when you least expect it. Phosmo Kira. A voice called out, female, urgent, layered with concern. Hands, rough, warm, steady, turned me over. I blinked up into a face framed by a white scarf, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen more life than mine ever had. The woman spoke in rapid Greek, half lifting me, half scolding me before pressing a canteen to my lips. The water hit my throat like salvation. "Elena," she said, pointing to herself. "Alexis," I managed my voice, barely a whisper. "Elena," she repeated, smiling gently as if to say, "You are safe now." She helped me up, her arm surprisingly strong for her small frame, and pointed toward a farmhouse nestled among the olive trees. The air was thick with the smell of thyme and earth. Inside, everything was simple wooden beams, stone floors, herbs hanging from the ceiling. A man appeared in the doorway, older, sun-darkened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Nikos," Elena said, gesturing toward him. He nodded, cautious but kind. She poured water into a glass, pressed it into my hands, and ladled soup from a pot simmering on the stove. The smell made my stomach cramp with hunger. That night they gave me a small room with whitewashed walls and a handmade quilt. I collapsed into the bed, the soft murmur of Greek words floating from the kitchen below, lulling me to sleep. When morning came, the first light crept across the floorboards like a promise. On the chair beside my bed was a folded cotton dress, clean, smelling faintly of soap and sun. I dressed slowly, staring at myself in the mirror. My hair was tangled, my eyes swollen, but there was something new in my reflection. Not beauty, not strength, not yet, but possibility. And for the first time in years, I wanted to see who I could become. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm both foreign and strangely soothing. At first, I tried to explain to Elena and Nikos that I couldn't stay, that I would find a way to return to America, that this was only temporary. But Elena simply smiled, shook her head, and placed a steaming cup of strong coffee in front of me. "Stay," she said softly, one of the few English words she knew. Then she pointed outside to where the olive trees shimmered silver in the morning light. "Rest." And I did. The first few days, my body refused to move. I slept in fits and starts, waking up to the sound of roosters or the murmur of Greek conversations drifting through open windows. Every time I tried to leave, Elena would find a gentle way to stop me, by pressing bread into my hands, by patting the chair next to her at the kitchen table, by pointing to the storm clouds outside, and shaking her head. I could have resisted. I could have forced myself back to the bus station. But each time I imagined retracing my steps to that small Italian town, to the humiliation, the cold indifference, the laughter, I froze. And so I stayed. In those first quiet mornings, I learned to listen again. The wind carried secrets through the olive branches. The earth smelled of sun and rain. The sound of Nikos's boots crunching over gravel became as familiar as my own heartbeat. It was humbling in the best way. Elena began teaching me small things: how to gather eggs from the hens without startling them, how to hang laundry so the mountain breeze caught it just right, how to slice bread so thinly it could stretch a meal without waste. Each task carried a rhythm of patience that my old life had erased. At night, I would sit on the porch while the last light faded over the hills. Nikos would smoke his pipe, Elena would knit or hum an old song, and I would simply breathe. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't trying to prove anything or fix anyone. I was just existing. Still, guilt lingered like a shadow. I thought of my parents back home, of the few friends I hadn't pushed away under Gabriel's influence. I thought of my mother's warnings before I married him, her eyes weary but kind, her voice steady when she said, "Be careful, darling. Love can feel like safety right up until it becomes a cage." I hadn't understood her then, but I did now. On the fourth day, I told Elena I should go. I used the translation app on my phone. Nikos had found an adapter so I could charge it. Slowly, awkwardly, I typed, "I have to go back to my country. You have done enough for me. I cannot stay forever." Elena read the words, her brow furrowing. She turned to Nikos, murmured something, then looked back at me. She pointed outside rain again, the sky dark and heavy, and shook her head. Then she touched her hand to her heart and said simply, "Family." The word lodged in my throat. That evening, she showed me a wooden box she kept on the mantel. Inside were photographs, faded, creased, but handled with love. She pointed to one of a younger woman, dark-haired and smiling, holding a baby in her arms. "Sophia," she said softly, then gestured far away. "Australia." Her eyes filled with tears. She mimed holding a child, then lowered her hand to indicate height grandbaby. I understood. Her daughter was gone, living a life an ocean away, and in her eyes I saw something familiar: loneliness, the kind that settles deep in the bones. Maybe that's why I stayed. Maybe we both needed someone to fill an empty space. Days turned into weeks. My hands, once soft from years of comfort, grew rough and brown from the sun. My back ached, my muscles protested, but every evening when I looked at the baskets of olives I'd gathered, a quiet pride bloomed in my chest. One afternoon, as we sat shelling peas together, Elena looked at me thoughtfully. Her English was improving, just as my Greek was stumbling toward coherence. "Home?" she asked, miming an airplane. "You want go home?" The question struck me like a blow. For a long time I didn't answer. Home. The word had lost its meaning. When I finally spoke, the words tumbled out in broken pieces, half English, half tears. I told her about Gabriel, about the fight, about how he'd driven away laughing, about how I had begged him to come back, about how I had built a life around someone who saw me as furniture, something beautiful, useful, but silent. Elena didn't interrupt. She simply reached across the table, her hand weathered and warm, and placed it over mine. When I finished, she pointed to her heart, then to me. "Stay," she whispered. "Work. Peace." And somehow those three words became the foundation of my new life. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, she woke me with a gentle shake. She handed me a pair of old work boots and a cotton shirt that had once belonged to Sophia. "Elia," she said, pointing outside. "Olives." We walked together into the grove. The dawn light spilled across the hills, gilding the leaves in silver and gold. I followed her through the trees, the air cool and damp, the earth soft beneath my boots. Elena showed me how to rake the branches gently so the olives fell onto the nets below. My first attempts were clumsy: leaves showered down, sticks snapped, and the few olives I managed to gather were bruised. Nikos chuckled softly from a distance. Boston Lady Elena teased, laughing with a kindness that didn't sting. By mid-morning, my shoulders burned, my hands blistered, and sweat soaked through my shirt. But when we stopped for water, she took my hands gently and rubbed them with a balm she'd made herself. Olive oil, beeswax, and something that smelled faintly of rosemary. "Tomorrow better," she promised. She was right. Each day I improved. My hands toughened, my movements became surer. I began to feel the rhythm of the work, the whisper of wind through branches, the thud of olives falling onto canvas, the call of birds overhead. And somewhere between exhaustion and gratitude, something inside me began to heal. I started helping Elena in the kitchen too. She taught by showing, not explaining. Her cooking had no measurements, just instinct and years of practice. When she kneaded dough for bread, I mimicked her movements, failing often, but laughing more than I had in years. The first loaf I baked was a disaster, burnt on the outside, raw inside. I tried to throw it away, but she stopped me, breaking it open and tasting it with a nod. "Learning," she said. "No waste." It was such a simple thing. But in my old life, mistakes were things to hide, not to learn from. The simplicity of their days began to reshape me. The food, the laughter, the way they argued gently and made up over wine at sunset, it was a kind of wealth I'd never known. Everything had purpose. Everything was earned. One evening, as I sat outside after a long day watching the sky turn from amber to indigo, I realized something startling. I hadn't thought about Gabriel all day. Not once. And that silence in my mind, the absence of his voice, his criticism, his shadow felt like freedom. The weeks stretched into months, and my days began to flow with a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Dawn arrived with the low hum of bees among the olive blossoms and the first pale brush of sunlight over the hills. I would rise before the roosters braid my hair back and step into the cool morning air with my basket and gloves, feeling the ground's quiet pulse beneath my feet. The work was relentless. Calluses formed, nails broke, muscles ached, but there was something honest in the exhaustion that followed. For years I'd gone to sleep in silk sheets beside a man who left me feeling hollow. Now I fell into bed every night, sore, filthy, and at peace. Elena often hummed as we worked melodies that had no words but seemed older than the earth itself. Her voice, soft but steady, anchored me. Sometimes she would stop mid-song to correct my stance, or to lift my chin and make me look out across the grove. "See," she'd say, pointing toward the horizon where the Aegean shimmered in the distance. "Good work brings good life." I didn't know if she meant the olive trees or me, maybe both. As my Greek improved, our conversations deepened. I learned that she and Nikos had inherited this land from his grandfather, that each tree had its own history. Storms, weathered roots spread deep into the same soil their ancestors had walked. They spoke of the olive harvest as though it were a sacred ritual, not labor but an act of faith. At first I thought they were exaggerating, but then I started to understand. When you've lost everything, tending to something living, something that grows because you care for it, feels like prayer. By late spring, the grove was part of me. I could tell which trees were heavy with fruit and which needed rest. I knew how to listen for the subtle sigh of branches ready for harvest. I even began sketching designs in a small notebook again, ideas for labels, packaging, maybe even a little rebranding for their olive oil. It wasn't much, but it was mine. One evening, after a long day of sorting olives, Nikos placed a small basket on the table in front of me. Inside were a few bills, neatly folded. "For you," he said, his accent thick but his meaning clear. I stared at the money. "No, I can't." He raised a hand, shaking his head. "Work is work. You help. You earn." It was a small amount, less than what Gabriel once spent on a bottle of wine. But as I held those euros, a strange, overwhelming emotion surged through me. It wasn't about the money. It was about freedom. That night, I tucked the envelope beneath my pillow, my hand resting on it as I fell asleep. For years, Gabriel had controlled every dollar I touched. He'd said it was for convenience, that he'd handle the finances so I could focus on the home. I'd believed him, mistaking control for love. Now this modest pay, earned through sweat, through my own hands, felt more valuable than all the wealth I'd once lived among. By early summer, the village felt like home. Children waved when I walked into town. The baker saved me the first loaf from each morning's batch. The pharmacist offered to teach me new Greek phrases. Even the women at the market, once wary of the strange foreigner, had begun to greet me warmly, pressing fruit or flowers into my hands. I had become someone again. Not a wife, not an ornament, not a shadow, just Alexis. And with each passing day, I found her harder to let go of. One evening, Elena invited me to the village taverna. I hesitated, old instincts of self-consciousness flickering, but she insisted, pressing a blouse into my hands. "Pretty," she said, smiling. We sat at a long wooden table beneath a vine-covered pergola, the air thick with music and laughter. Nikos raised a glass of rough village wine, his eyes glinting. "To family," he said simply. "To family," I echoed, my voice trembling. It was then that they told me. "We old now," Elena said, tapping her chest. 68, 70, the trees too many for us." Nikos nodded solemnly, setting down his glass. "Sophia not come back. Business must stay alive. You strong, you smart. We teach. You learn." I frowned, not understanding. "Teach me?" Elena smiled, her eyes glistening. "You take. One day yours." I froze, stunned. They were offering me their life's work, their olive farm, their legacy. I can't, I whispered. It's not right. You have family. Elena shook her head gently. Your family. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of cicadas through the open window. The moonlight spilled across the whitewashed wall, and I realized I was crying not from sadness, but from something deeper belonging. They were offering me what Gabriel had never given me trust. Over the next few months, I became their student in earnest. Nikos taught me about soil composition, irrigation, and the delicate balance of harvesting time. Elena taught me business, how to track expenses in her faded ledgers, how to barter at the market, how to read the seasons through the behavior of the trees. I modernized what I could. I designed new labels, crafted brochures in both Greek and English, and even created a simple website using a borrowed laptop. At the market, I began speaking directly to tourists, explaining the history behind our oil. They loved it. Sales grew. Elena would beam with pride whenever she saw me explaining something in Greek, nodding approvingly. Boston lady smart, she'd say. Good for business. For the first time, I wasn't just helping them. I was building something with them. One humid evening after the day's harvest, I sat by the fire scrolling through old photos on my phone. Gabriel's face flashed across the screen, perfect smile, perfect posture, perfect everything. I stared at him for a long moment, feeling nothing. Then curiosity stirred. My thumb hovered over my email app. It had been months since I'd opened it. I wasn't sure I wanted to. But when I did, the flood of unread messages made my stomach twist. Dozens from old friends, some from my design mentor. Subject lines shifted from, "Where are you?" to, "Are you okay?" to, "We're worried." Guilt prickled at me, but before I could respond, another name caught my eye. Gabriel Davis. My breath caught. The subject line read, "I know where you are." My pulse thundered in my ears. The email was dated 2 hours earlier. Alexis. It's taken me months and a private investigator, but I finally tracked you down. This has gone on long enough. I'm coming to bring you home and end this ridiculous tantrum. My flight lands in Athens on Thursday. Be ready. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the phone. Thursday, 3 days from now. He was coming. The man who had abandoned me, humiliated me, was coming to collect me like a lost item. I ran downstairs, my heart pounding. Elena looked up from her ledger, her brow furrowed with concern. Bad news, she asked. Gabriel, I whispered. He's coming here. She studied me for a long moment, then reached beneath the ledger and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table. Good timing, she said softly. Inside were documents, legal papers written in Greek and English. Partnership, she explained. 1/3 business. Yours, not future. Now. Tears blurred my vision. It wasn't just generosity, it was affirmation. Proof that I had built something real, something that couldn't be taken away. Elena looked at me, her voice firm and certain. You choose. He not decide anymore. Her words settled into me like an anchor. Gabriel might be coming. But this time, I wasn't the woman he'd left behind. Thursday arrived beneath a sky so blue it almost felt cruel. The kind of day made for laughter, for market chatter, for baskets filled with herbs and bread, not for the ghosts of old lives to come knocking. By then I had prepared everything. Not the way Gabriel would expect, no suitcase, no frantic packing, no trembling apologies, but quiet preparation, strength, clarity, boundaries. 3 days earlier, after reading his email, I'd walked to the small law office near the harbor, a modest white building with a hand-painted sign that read Katerina and Associates. Katerina, the village's only lawyer, had listened silently as I explained, her sharp eyes taking in every word. She'd helped me draft divorce papers in both English and Greek. The sound of the printer spitting out each page had felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. That same night, I'd written to my old mentor, the one who'd offered me a remote consulting position months earlier. I accepted, tentatively, cautiously. But it was a beginning. And for the first time since Italy, I'd also written to a few friends I'd lost along the way, not long, apologetic messages, just small fragments of truth. I disappeared because I needed to survive. I'm safe now. I'm rebuilding. Each email felt like reclaiming a fragment of the woman I used to be before Gabriel, before the control, before the silence. So when Thursday came, I was ready. The morning began like any other. Nikos and I were in the press room, testing the viscosity of the season's first batch of oil. The scent of green fruit filled the air, bitter and clean. I was leaning over a sample jar when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Nikos looked up, frowning. A car door slammed, then another. Through the open doorway I saw him. Gabriel. He looked almost exactly as I remembered, tall, composed, wearing clothes that probably cost more than our entire month's harvest earnings. But something in him had changed. Or maybe I had. He looked smaller against the vast backdrop of olive trees, out of place among the stone and soil. He didn't see me at first. He stood by the silver rental car, surveying the farmhouse with visible distaste. Then I stepped out of the press room, wiping my hands on my apron. Gabriel. His head jerked up. For a brief, satisfying moment, shock crossed his face. He took in my sun-browned skin, the loose work clothes, the braid falling over my shoulder. His perfect composure wavered. "My God, Alexis," he said finally. His voice caught somewhere between disbelief and disgust. "What happened to you?" I almost laughed. "Life happened." He blinked, thrown off balance. That was new. Gabriel was used to being the one in control of every tone, every word. "You look different," he said, trying for charm but failing. "You've been hiding here playing farmer. This isn't you." He took a step toward me, arms outstretched, but I didn't move. "Don't," I said quietly. "Not this time." He stopped mid-step, irritation flickering across his features. "I came to take you home," he said, as if announcing a verdict. "This little escape has gone on long enough." "This is home," I said. The words left my mouth before I even realized I'd spoken them, but they felt right, true. Behind me, Elena and Nikos had appeared at the doorway, silent but present guardians made of patience and sunlight. Their eyes never left me. Gabriel followed my gaze toward them, his jaw tightening. "Are these the people keeping you here? What did they tell you? Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" "They didn't keep me here," I said, my voice steady. "They taught me. About work, about kindness, about how to build something that matters." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're a designer, Alexis. You belong in Boston, not out here picking fruit with peasants. This is a fantasy. You've made your point. Now stop punishing me and let's go." I tilted my head, studying him. "Punishing you," I repeated softly. "Gabriel. You left me stranded in a foreign country, without money, without a phone, without a single person to turn to. You blocked me. You humiliated me. I'm not punishing you. I survived you." His expression faltered for the first time, but pride wouldn't let him yield. "That's not fair," he said tightly. "I was drunk. It was a stupid mistake. I apologized." "When I asked?" "When you tracked me down with a private investigator and told me to be ready when you landed." "That's not an apology, Gabriel. That's control." He took a deep breath, temper rising. "You're being irrational. You're angry. I get that. But think about what you're giving up: our life, our home, everything we built." I met his gaze squarely. "Everything you built," I corrected. "A life that only looked good from the outside. Inside, it was empty. I was empty." His tone sharpened. "And this is better manual labor poverty. You think living in a stone hut makes you free?" I stepped closer, the anger in me no longer fear, but clarity. "Yes," I said simply. "Because here, what I have, I've earned. My hands are rough, my clothes are stained, but every single thing I touch is mine. My choices, my work, my life." Behind me, Elena moved forward and pressed something into my hand. The envelope. The partnership agreement. I unfolded it and held it out to Gabriel. "This is my business now," I said. "1/3 owner, legally registered. I'm not your wife to command anymore. I'm a partner, a worker, a woman who doesn't need permission to exist." His face reddened. "You can't be serious." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the second envelope, the divorce papers. "Completely serious. Katerina, the local lawyer, has already filed these. You'll receive the official notice through the consulate." He stared at the papers as though they were written in another language. "You'd throw everything away for this," he said, gesturing at the grove, the farmhouse, the life he couldn't understand. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said softly. "I'm finally keeping something for myself." He flinched, caught between anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this. When you're 50 and still here sweating under this sun, you'll remember what you gave up." "Maybe," I admitted. "But if I regret it, it'll be my regret, not yours." A silence settled between us, then thick, final. The kind of silence that happens when something breaks that can't be fixed. Nico stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. He said something to Gabriel in Greek, his tone firm but not cruel. Gabriel frowned. What did he say? I looked at him. He said the road back to Athens is long and the sun sets fast. You should leave soon if you want to make it before dark. For a moment, I thought he'd argue. But then he looked at me. Really looked at me, and saw what he hadn't noticed. Before, I was no longer the woman who begged him to love her. I was no longer afraid. Without another word, he turned, got into his car, and drove away. As the dust settled on the road, Elena slipped her arm through mine. Nikos nodded once silently, then returned to his work. I stood there for a long moment, watching the silver car shrink into a glint on the horizon. Then I turned back toward the grove. The late afternoon light painted everything gold, the leaves, the earth, the house. My house. Our house. The day's work still waited, oil to test, bread to bake, tomorrow's market to prepare for. And for the first time, the word tomorrow didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a gift. Sometimes the cruelest actions yield the most unexpected blessings. Gabriel had driven away that night in Italy thinking he'd broken me. He didn't know he'd set me free. If my story reached you, if it reminded you that even the deepest betrayals can become beginnings, then don't let it fade. Leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength after loss. Because maybe, just maybe, we all deserve a second chance to come home to ourselves,